My name is Lila, and my friend Ethan warned me never to trust strangers online. But when I met him, the man who promised everything I ever wanted, I didn't listen. I thought it was just a game of money and favors. I was wrong. So wrong. Because some promises are traps, and some houses are alive. I never thought I would find myself here, sitting alone in my tiny apartment with nothing but the glow of my phone lighting the walls, scrolling through profiles late into the night. It wasn't desperation that led me here, well, not entirely. It was curiosity, and the sharp, whispering pull of money I didn't have. Rent was overdue, bills were stacking, and my job barely covered the basics. I told myself it was just a temporary thing, a way to survive. But as I stared at the screen at his profile, I felt something unsettling stir deep in my chest. He looked normal to normal. In fact, a successful man, charming, confident, offering more than just attention. He promised financial support, gifts, experiences that I had only dreamed of. The first time I met him, the world outside seemed to blur. His house was enormous, far bigger than any place I had ever stepped into. The walls were covered in paintings, each one more bizarre than the last. Faces twisted into expressions I couldn't name, eyes that seemed to follow me as I walked past. The carpet was soft under my feet, muffling every step, but the silence was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, as if it were observing me, testing me. He welcomed me with a smile that felt too wide, too perfect. He offered me drinks, but I hesitated. Something about the way he watched me, the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, made my stomach turn. Still, I accepted the cash he pressed into my hand. It was heavy, far heavier than I expected, and I could swear it burned slightly against my fingers, like it carried a secret, something more than currency. As I left, I noticed a pair of shoes at the bottom of his staircase. They were perfectly polished, facing outward, as if someone had just stepped away. But I was certain no one else lived there. My heartbeat quickened, and I found myself glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching me. The night air felt colder than usual as I walked to my car, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, reaching, almost hungry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his smile in the darkness, lingering in my mind even after I had closed my eyes. When I finally drifted, I dreamed of him standing over me. His face warped into something grotesque, his eyes black pits that swallowed the light around them. I woke up sweating, clutching my blanket, my chest tight with fear I couldn't name. The next morning I noticed something on my arms. Small scratches, faint but deliberate, as though someone or something had traced my skin while I slept. I hadn't touched anything sharp. I didn't even own anything capable of making marks like that. My reflection in the mirror seemed wrong, as if my skin had lost a bit of color overnight and my eyes looked hollow, almost too dark around the edges. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that the stress had made me see shadows where none existed, but the sense of being watched lingered gnawing at me. Even when I stepped outside, past the safety of my apartment, I felt eyes tracking me, following me in ways that were impossible. When I looked over my shoulder, nothing was there. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he or the house was there, observing, waiting. I went about my day in a haze, half convinced I was losing my mind. But when I returned home, I noticed something strange on the floor. A single shoe, small and delicate, that wasn't mine, placed neatly near the door. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. I hadn't opened the door in hours, hadn't had any visitors. My apartment was supposed to be empty. The scratches returned that night, deeper, angrier this time. They seemed to trace shapes I couldn't recognize, patterns that made my skin crawl. And in the corner of my vision, I kept seeing movement shadows shifting independently, stretching, as if they were alive and watching me. I tried to convince myself to sleep, to rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt him there, closer, his presence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. By the time dawn broke, I was trembling uncontrollably. Something had changed in me overnight. Something had followed me back from that house, and I knew, with a creeping certainty, that this was only the beginning. The money, the gifts, the promises, they weren't free. They never were. And I couldn't shake the feeling that one day, the price would be demanded in full, in a way I could never escape. The money kept coming, and with it, the invitations. At first I thought I could handle it, control it, but each time I returned to his house, the walls seemed to close in a little more, the shadows stretching longer, darker. The silence inside was heavy, like a thick blanket pressing against my ears, and the air smelled faintly of decay, faintly of something that shouldn't exist in a normal home. I began to notice small things that didn't make sense, stains on the carpet that hadn't been there before, doors that seemed to open on their own, and whispers so soft I thought I was imagining them. The first time I saw the locked door, it didn't seem unusual. There were many doors in that house, after all, and I had been careful not to look too closely, not to pry too much, but this one felt different. The key lay on the floor outside, almost as if it had been left deliberately for me to find. I froze, staring at it. Something inside me urged me to leave it alone, but curiosity gnawed at the edges of my fear. I picked up the key with trembling fingers, and for a moment I hesitated. The air around me grew colder, heavier, almost suffocating. I could hear a faint creaking sound, like the house itself was inhaling. Finally, I slid the key into the lock, turning it slowly. The door swung open with a groan that sounded like a scream muffled behind walls. Inside, the room was lined with shelves, each one filled with glass jars. At first I thought they held trinkets or ornaments, but as I leaned closer, the reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Inside each jar were body parts, hair, teeth, fingernails, and some jars had tiny fragments of flesh. My stomach twisted violently, and I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a shelf. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to run, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that made my heart leap into my throat. The whispering started almost immediately. Not soft this time, but loud, urgent, echoing off the walls. Hundreds of voices, overlapping, murmuring my name, calling to me, beckoning me to stay. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, inside my head as much as around me. My legs felt like lead, my body refusing to obey. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time seemed meaningless inside that room. The whispers grew harsher, angrier, as though the house itself was demanding something from me. My eyes kept darting to the jars, to the body parts preserved like trophies. I thought I saw movement in the shadows between the shelves, like tiny hands reaching for me, like eyes blinking at me from the darkness. Panic rose in my chest until it was almost unbearable. When the door finally creaked open, I stumbled out, collapsing against the hallway wall. My hands shook violently, my chest heaving. I didn't look back, didn't check to see if anyone was following me. I ran out of the house and didn't T-stop until I was back in the safety of my apartment. But even there I could feel the house's presence lingering, like a cold breath against my neck, like something crawling just beneath my skin. That night, the scratches returned. They were deeper now, spreading over my arms, my shoulders, leaving marks that seemed deliberate, almost patterned. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection seemed wrong, distorted. My skin looked paler, almost gray, and my eyes were sunken, darkened at the edges. I could see faint streaks of something darker running through the whites of my eyes. I tried to sleep, but the shadows in my room moved in impossible ways. Corners stretched longer than they should. Doors appeared where there were none. And in every reflective surface I caught glimpses of movement that wasn't mine. I could hear the faint whispers again, now so close I could almost feel them brushing against my ears, tasting the words before I understood them. And then I saw it just for a moment, in the corner of my eye. A shadow, taller than a man, with long, spindly limbs that bent in ways human arms never could. It moved with a purpose, creeping silently across the floor, stopping just short of the bed, as if studying me. When I tried to focus on it directly, it vanished, but the fear lingered, burning under my skin, leaving me unable to look away from every dark corner, every reflective surface. By morning, I was exhausted, hollowed out. The money didn't feel like money anymore. It felt like a trap, a chain slowly tightening around me. I didn't know what he wanted from me, or why the house seemed alive, almost sentient. I only knew one thing. I had seen too much, and there was no going back. The presence, the whispers, the shadows, they weren't just in the house. They were with me now, and I had a creeping certainty that they would never let me go. I told myself I had to stop seeing him. I had to end this arrangement before it completely consumed me. But no matter how many times I ignored his messages, they kept coming. Polite at first, almost charming. But underneath there was a cold insistence I couldn't ignore. I tried to convince myself it was just persistence, just someone trying to maintain a connection. But deep down I knew it was more. He had a way of finding me, a way of knowing where I was, even when I stayed locked inside my apartment for days at a time. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind outside my window made me jump. I kept checking the locks, every night, multiple times, imagining him standing outside, waiting, smiling. The scratches on my arms and shoulders had grown deeper, forming patterns I didn't understand. I avoided mirrors because the reflection didn't feel like mine. I would catch glimpses of my own face, but the eyes staring back at me were hollow, darker than before, almost mocking, and for a brief moment I thought I saw the faintest shadow of a smile that wasn't mine. Then I found the photo. It was tucked under my bed, as if someone or something had placed it there while I slept. I didn't recognize the photographer, but the image was unmistakable. It was me, asleep, completely unaware, completely exposed. My stomach churned, and my hands shook violently as I stared at it. I had no idea how it got there. No one had been in my apartment. I hadn't invited anyone. And yet the evidence was there, staring at me with a cruel inevitability. Despite the terror clawing at me, a part of me was drawn back to his house, a sick curiosity that I could not suppress. I told myself I had to see it one last time, to understand what was happening, to confront the fear that had been haunting me relentlessly. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe if I saw it, maybe if I understood, I could finally walk away. But the moment I stepped inside, the air hit me like a fist. It smelled of decay and something else I could not name, a coppery temp that made my stomach lurch. The house was quiet, deceptively quiet, but the silence felt alive, like it was listening. The first thing I noticed was the absence of the portraits. They had been everywhere before, twisted faces staring at me, watching me, but now the walls were bare. The shelves that once held the jars were empty, leaving only scratches and dark stains behind. The realization hit me like ice. The house had been active even in my absence. It had moved, consumed, changed. It was not just a place. It was a living entity, shaping itself around the people who entered, feeding on them in ways I couldn't comprehend. I wandered the halls cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Every room seemed familiar, yet impossibly different, as though the house itself had shifted while I was away. Then I saw the writing on the walls. Deep, jagged scratches, forming a single word repeated over and over. Mine. My pulse spiked, and a chill ran down my spine. The word was not written with paint or pen. It was carved, gouged, bleeding into the plaster like it had been etched with fingernails. The whispering began again, soft at first, teasing, playful, then louder, more urgent, like hundreds of voices layered on top of one another. They echoed in my head, calling my name, laughing at me, warning me, promising me. I tried to cover my ears, to shut them out, but it was useless. The sound seemed to seep into my skull, vibrating through my bones, rattling me from the inside. And then I saw it in the mirror. My reflection, standing perfectly still, watching me. But the eyes were not mine. They were older, darker, filled with a knowledge I could not understand. The mouth curved into a smile that I had not made. I stumbled back, crashing into the wall, trying to break the gaze. But no matter where I turned, no matter how quickly I moved, the reflection followed, smiling, patient, waiting. Fear consumed me, but more than fear, there was a fascination I could not explain. The house wanted me to look, wanted me to see what it had been hiding, what it had been planning. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't move. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, closing in, pressing against my skin, as if the house wanted me trapped inside it, wanted me to understand that this was not just a home, it was a predator. I fled eventually, bursting through the front door and into the night, but the terror did not end. The whispers followed me, faint, distant, yet unmistakable, and in every reflective surface on my way home, I caught glimpses of movement that was not mine, of shadows that stretched and reached, of eyes that blinked at me from places they should not exist. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew I was changed. Something had touched me in that house, something older, darker, and infinitely patient. It had claimed a piece of me, and I felt it waiting, always waiting, like a predator stalking prey, inside the walls, inside my mind, inside my reflection. And deep down, I understood that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the house, the man, the presence, whatever it was, would not stop until it had me completely. I couldn't escape it. No matter what I did, the presence had followed me home, settled inside my apartment like a parasite I could not dislodge. Every corner, every shadow, felt alive. I would wake in the middle of the night to the faintest creak of my floorboards, or the soft brushing of something across my walls. I knew I was not imagining it. I couldn't be. The feeling of being watched was constant, oppressive, suffocating, and it was patient, waiting for the moment I finally broke. The scratches had spread over my body, forming strange, deliberate patterns. I tried to understand them, to make sense of the shapes, but they resisted logic. They almost looked like letters, symbols, warnings I couldn't read. Each morning I awoke to find them deeper, darker, as if they had been carved into me overnight by invisible hands. My reflection no longer comforted me. Mirrors had become traps, portals, or worse, prisons. I would glance at my face and see fragments of other people's faces twisted in terror, eyes wide, mouths screaming silently. I couldn't tear my gaze away. The longer I looked, the more my own features seemed to warp, blending with theirs. And then I noticed if the reflection smiled without my lips moving. A cruel, slow smile that started at one corner of the mouth and spread until it consumed the entire face. My chest tightened, panic rising in my throat, but no matter how fast I turned away, it followed. The eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to reach out through the glass, clawing at me, pulling me closer. My heart raced. I felt something in the reflection watching me, studying me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Sleep had become impossible. I stayed awake for days, pacing my apartment, trying to convince myself it was a dream, some sickness of the mind. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, sharper, more insistent. They called my name, promised me things I didn't want, threatened me with consequences I could not understand. Sometimes the voice sounded human, sometimes not, layered with an inhuman resonance that made my bones vibrate. I would cover my ears, but it seeped into my mind, into my very thoughts. It was inside me, as much as outside. The air in my apartment grew heavier. Shadows shifted unnaturally, corners stretching farther than they should, dark shapes forming at the edges of my vision. I could feel them creeping closer, crawling across the walls, moving under the floorboards behind the ceiling. Every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, even spoons, showed me fragments of movement that wasn't mine. I would see the outline of a figure behind me, always standing just out of reach, always watching. When I turned, it vanished, but the feeling remained, the certainty that I was never truly alone. I tried to leave, to escape to somewhere normal, somewhere safe, but every exit led to another room, another hole that was unfamiliar and distorted, as if the world outside my apartment had twisted into the same nightmare as the house. I would open a door expecting my kitchen, and instead find a long, narrow corridor lined with mirrors reflecting infinite versions of myself, each one screaming silently, their eyes wide with terror. My breath came in ragged gasps. I stumbled back, and the corridor seemed to stretch farther, pulling me in. By now, I knew the horrifying truth. This presence had chosen me. The house had not been random. The man, the sugar daddy, was irrelevant. He had been a lure, a guide, a warning. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they were alive. They fed on fear, on curiosity, on greed, and now they had attached themselves to me. I could feel it in my chest, in my skin, a slow, steady pull, drawing me closer, binding me, changing me, and then I realized something worse. The house was inside me. I could feel it in my reflection, in the way my eyes darkened, in the way my body itched with invisible hands, tracing the shapes of symbols I could not read. I was not just haunted, I was becoming a part of it. I could feel it whispering, promising me power, but at a cost I could not yet comprehend. I collapsed against the wall, exhausted, shaking uncontrollably. As the shadows in my apartment stretched and twisted around me, I could hear laughter now, human and inhuman, echoing from every corner. I realized with a sinking horror that even if I escaped physically, even if I ran from the apartment, the presence would follow. It had claimed a piece of me, and it would never release it. By the time the night ended, or at least what felt like neat, I understood one undeniable truth. I was no longer entirely myself. The house, the whispers, the shadows, they were inside me now, patient, waiting, and infinitely hungry. And as I looked into the mirror one last time, I saw a smile spread across my own face, a smile that was not mine. When I woke up, I wasn't in my apartment. I wasn't anywhere familiar. The air was thick, heavy, with the same coppery temps I had smelled in his house. I tried to move, but my body felt stiff, uncooperative, as if it had been reshaped while I slept. The walls around me were lined with shelves, hundreds of them, stretching farther than I could see, and inside each shelf was a jar, perfectly clear, perfectly still, containing faces that stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. Some were familiar. I could see fragments of people I had read about in missing person reports, people I had only seen in news articles. Others were less familiar, but their fear was unmistakable. I stumbled forward, my hands shaking. Every jar seemed to watch me, and I could feel their eyes pressing into my mind, their panic vibrating through my chest. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The room stretched endlessly, like a labyrinth with no end, a prison with no doors. The whispering was louder here, layered and chaotic, coming from all directions. It was not a voice. It was every voice, every scream, every plea I had ever heard. Then I saw him, my sugar daddy. He wasn't standing, wasn't walking. He was trapped inside a jar, his mouth frozen in a scream, eyes wide and filled with disbelief. The man who had lured me, charmed me, terrified me, he was now one of the collected, one of the victims. I realized with horror that it had never been about him. He was just bait, just another name, another life to feed the house. The whispers circled me, faster and faster, tugging at my mind, pressing into every thought, twisting every memory. And then I noticed my reflection in a tall, narrow mirror at the end of the hall. I froze. The face staring back at me was mine, but it was also not mine. The eyes were blacker than they had ever been, hollowed with something older, something patient. The mouth curved into a slow, cruel smile I had never made. The longer I stared, the more I felt myself splitting, my identity dissolving, merging with something older, darker, impossible to name. I tried to move away, but the floor seemed to shift beneath me, bending, stretching, twisting. Shadows pooled along the edges of the room, stretching like living fingers, wrapping around my legs, pulling me toward the rows of jars. My body resisted, but the pull was too strong. I felt a cold pressure on my chest, deep inside. And it wasn't just the floor or the shadows, it was the house itself, reaching into me, claiming me, making me part of its collection. I glanced at one of the jars and saw myself inside it. The reflection within the glass was alive, panicked, screaming silently, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stumbled backward, but more jars appeared around me, each one containing a version of me, a fragment of me, trapped and silent. The whispers became words I could understand. Yours now, mine forever. They pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a promise and a threat intertwined. I tried to run, but the halls were endless. Every turn led to another corridor lined with mirrors, shelves, jars. The house had no exit. It didn't need one. It lived inside me now, in my eyes, in my skin, in the way my heartbeat synced with its whispers. I realized with sickening clarity that there was no escape, not for me, not for anyone. And then I understood the final horror. The house didn't just trap the bodies, it trapped the soul. Every laugh, every scream, every whisper I had heard, it wasn't just sound. It was the essence of the people it had claimed, feeding, twisting, growing, and now it had claimed me. I could feel it in my thoughts, in my fingers, in the way I could hear the echoes of its prisoner's terror in my own mind. Somewhere deep inside, I knew it would reach out again, whispering promises of wealth, charm, and power to the next person, the next greedy, curious soul. And the cycle would continue, endlessly, silently, patiently, like a predator waiting in the dark. I caught my reflection one last time in a mirror that seemed impossibly close and impossibly far away at the same time. My own face smiled back at me, perfectly calm, perfectly cruel. It was mine, but not mine. I felt the house stir within me, like a heartbeat inside my chest. And I knew then, with every ounce of fear that consumed me, that I was never leaving. Not really. And in the corner of my vision, I saw a shadow move, taller than any human, stretching toward me, patient, hungry, whispering my name. I was alone, and yet I was never truly alone.